All right, here we go. Welcome everybody to our Positive Parenting Through Attachment and Connection Lunch and Learn. My name is Olga Maripol. I am the Regional Director of Outreach for Fusion Academy. So great to see familiar faces and good to see new faces on here too. Just a little bit about who Fusion Academy is for those who are not familiar with us. Fusion Academy is a revolutionary private middle and high school serving 6th through 12th grade, where positive relationships unlock academic potential. All courses are one-to-one, one student and one teacher per classroom. This allows teachers to customize curriculum, teaching for each student's individual strength, interests, and learning style. Our supportive campus environment is a unique space that includes a state-of-the-art recording studio, mixed media art studio, and a homework cafe, where students complete all homework before going home. Flexible scheduling lets students enroll at any time of the year and take classes at a time of day that works best for them. We also offer tutoring support, still using our one-to-one setting with over 250 course offerings. We offer a fine balance between academic as well as social emotional support through the homework cafe, clubs, and activities. We have 7 campuses now in the DMV, including Washington, D.C., Loudoun, Reston, Tysons, Alexandria, Rockville, and Columbia. I also want to introduce Mona Bagzaran and Jonathan Wilkins, who are our new directors of outreach in the area. I think they're both on the call, so just wanted to get you guys to know those names and faces. All right, so a little housekeeping before we move into the presentation that you're all here for. So like I said, this is being recorded. I will be sending this to everybody who registered, who has to hop off early. You will get the recording. But if you want to turn your camera off, please feel free to. I definitely respect that. I will send the recording and the PowerPoint, like I said at the end. Please do keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. We definitely don't want to distract the speaker. If you want to rename yourself, please rename yourself to your first name and last name. That really helps when we get to that Q&A section, so I can call on you so you can ask your question. I am going to keep the chat open. The reason I want to keep the chat open is I want you guys to be able to collaborate and network and share resources. So even right now, if you want to share your business information or a service or any great articles that come up maybe as throughout the presentation, please feel free to use that through the chat. Know that the presenter will not be moderating the chat, but I will be. If you want to private message me or send me a direct message, you are more than welcome to throughout the presentation too. We will have a Q&A at the end, but if you ask questions throughout the presentation, I will hold on to them. If the question is answered, wonderful. If not, I'm going to hold on to it till the end when we get to that Q&A, and I can definitely ask it on your behalf. So I will keep track of everything in the chat. And when we get to the Q&A, please just keep it appropriate and not too personal. We have a lot of people joining us today, and we just want to respect everybody's confidentiality. All right, so let me introduce your speaker today. So our speaker is Dr. Jaclyn Halpern. She's a licensed psychologist in Maryland, DC, Delaware, and Virginia, with authority to practice interjudicial telepsychotherapy under the PsycCAT Commission. She's the director and co-founder of SOAR program for psychotherapy and testing at Washington Behavioral Medicine Associates, LLC in Chevy Chase, Maryland, a unique practice providing comprehensive collaborative mental health care through a team of psychiatrists, psychologists, and psychotherapists, offering individual and group therapy, parenting, art therapy, psychiatry, comprehensive testing, and TMS, neurofeedback, and VR therapy. Dr. Halpern has extensive experience as a clinical director, evaluator, therapist, parent coach, and supervisor. Dr. Halpern supervises and trains clinical staff and the doctoral students, and oversees general programming for SOAR. Dr. Halpern and her team are a team of neurodiversity affirmative, strength-based, and inclusive, and welcoming to all. I think I've talked a lot. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Halpern.
Thank you, Olga. I'm going to go ahead and just close the list over here. So you've got it for letting people in, yeah? Okay, excellent. Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Jaclyn Halpern. My pronouns are she, her. Today, I will be talking about positive and gentle parenting. And while I'll mostly be talking about a parent or caregiver's perspective, these methods and models are outstanding for educators and providers as well. I'm primarily going to focus on 3 different parenting models that build on each other very well and that are based on the same neuroscience. They can be utilized and modified for children of all ages. And in fact, I would say most of these techniques work whether you're dealing with an infant, a toddler, a young child, a teenager, or even an adult. I'm not going to go through every slide in full depth. As Olga said, you'll be getting a copy of the slides at the end. So I've included a lot of information, including some other slides that you're going to get that are not in the presentation today, so that you can have everything you need to follow up. So I'll go, at a pace to get through everything, and you may not have a chance to read every word on the slides, and just know you're going to get a copy of these. Okay. Try to move forward here. Uh-oh. There we go. Okay, so this is just a little introduction to me that you'll have. As Olga said, I'm the director and co-founder of the SOAR program for psychotherapy and testing at Washington Behavioral Medicine Associates. So as we talk about parenting today, we're going to be talking about it through the perspective of attachment theory. So attachment theory was first created and proposed by Dr. John Bowlby, and he described it as the lasting psychological connectedness between human beings. Professor Elizabeth Harlow, who has looked at attachment theory in the educational system, said it encourages the understanding of emotional needs of children as they exist within relationships. Parents and caregivers of all kinds become the secure bases or attachment figures to maximize a child's learning and development. It can be applied for the well-being of every child. And so parents, caregivers, teachers, and providers of all kinds can use attachment theory to help children. Just a reminder to please mute yourself if you come on. Thank you. So with this theory in mind, it's recommended that the primary goals within the parent-caregiver and child relationship are security, trust, and understanding. The same is true in the relationship between educator and provider and the child. So to do this, we need to engage with compassion, empathy, and respect, and avoid shaming. And this is something that you're going to hear me talk about throughout the presentation today. Children internalize shame, and when they do, they end up feeling embarrassed, fearful, and not good enough. And as parents, educators, and providers, obviously this is something that we want to avoid. Their self-confidence drops and they start to give up on themselves, which actually often leads to an increase in the negative behaviors that we were trying to stop in the first place. So we're going to talk briefly about punishment. I often get asked, well, what about punishment? What about consequences? So the problem with punishment is that the research shows punishment does not work. It does not build respectful relationships, teach children lessons we want them to learn, or benefit development. It also is a problem when we isolate children, when we scream at them, when we yell or use verbal or physical threats, because it creates a sense of fear, terror, and pain. So we often will talk about timeouts, and while they are absolutely not the worst form of punishment, attachment parenting really moves away from the idea of timeouts to something called time in, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, because the idea is that we are there with our children when they're having a tough moment, not isolating them and leaving them alone. And I've often heard it said, you want to do this when the kids are young, so that when they're teenagers and they have those big feelings and hard moments, they still come and talk to you. When children feel fear or terror or pain, their brain interprets a threat and their body has a physiological and neurological response to that threat. And while their behavior might change because of punishment, it's out of fear, not because they're learning or growing. They internalize pain and shame, which can lead to long-term trauma and impact future behaviors, relationships, and well-being. So then we talk, what about discipline? And discipline and punishment are 2 different things. They're not the same. Discipline actually means to teach at its most basic. And so let me take this a step further. Attachmentparenting.org says discipline that is empathetic, loving, and respectful strengthens the connection between caregiver and child, while harsh, overly punitive discipline weakens that connection. Again, think punishment there. Remember that the ultimate goal of discipline is to help children develop self-control and self-discipline. So this understanding has really started to lead to a parenting shift and a paradigm shift. What happens if caregivers start to consider discipline that allows us a loving and nurturing way to help our children? And what if the goal is to better understand our children rather than focusing on the behaviors themselves? So we're going to start by asking the question, why? What is going on beneath the behavior? We look for the why beneath the behavior. So we're going to begin talking about the different models that I mentioned. And Dr. Stan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson explain the importance of distinguishing between can't versus won't when thinking about discipline and figuring out the why beneath the behavior. Often, a child misbehaves because they can't find a better way of self-regulating in that particular moment. Dr. Ross Green uses the term lagging skills and unsolved problems, and he explains kids do well if they can. And that's something you'll hear me say a lot as well. Kids do well if they can't, if they can. If they can't, something's wrong, and it's our job to figure out what, to look for the why. So we see their behavior show us when something's wrong, and the behavior is very much a symptom that something more is going on. It's our job, again, to figure out why and to help with skill building. Dr. Green explains that we need to understand what's getting in the way in order to actually help our child. So when Dr. Green talks about unsolved problems, he explains that an unsolved problem is any trigger, situation, or circumstance or condition that leads to acting out behaviors. They tend to set off negative behaviors because of lagging skills or those can't circumstances. So Dr. Green has an entire long list of lagging skills, and the resources will be shared at the end of the presentation. There's a bibliography, so when you get those slides, you'll be able to access these. He has them on his website. But lagging skill could be anything from difficulty with the transition, difficulty maintaining focus and using goal-directed problem solving. It could be rigid or black and white, very literal thinking, or difficulty when a routine changes. There are a number of different things that can fall into this category. It can be trouble seeking attention in appropriate ways or a different way of empathizing. So the third person who we're going to talk about today, or the third group of people, this is Dr. Mona Delahooke, and she talks about bottom-up versus top-down thinking. And what she says is we often assume a child has control over their behaviors when they do not. And this is a mistake that we make because it leads to three different errors. When we look at behavior as something a child can fully control and that they're choosing, we try to change it before we understand its cause. We tend to use a one-size-fits-all technique, and we don't take development into account. So she explains we need to understand the difference between an intentional misbehavior and a stress response. So she describes bottom-up or body-up behaviors as reflexive, self-protective, automatic responses that do not involve conscious thought. And top-down thinking is something that develops over time and allows us to eventually develop intentional control over behaviors and impulses, to learn and reflect on our actions, and to pursue long-term goals. And I don't know about you, but I personally know a lot of adults who are still working on this, let alone children. So Dr. Mona Hook says, we have to think about behavior like an iceberg, and it's very possible you've seen this model. It's used in a couple of different places. Her iceberg shows us, we see the tip, that's what's going on, that's the behavior, that's what we can see, but we need to look for what's going on beneath the behavior. We need to attune to the child and then begin by supporting the whys that are underneath that behavior. And so as Dr. Green talks about lagging skills and Dr. Siegel and Bryson talk about can't behaviors, she says we have to think about internal body processes like hunger and thirst. We need to think about the way that a body is processing sensations. A lot of children are either oversensitive or undersensitive to stimuli like light, sound, smell, taste. We need to look at emotions, thoughts, memories, ideas. We need to look at the ability to plan and execute actions like motor planning. And that's different in different children. And then developmental capacities and processes, which are absolutely not one size fits all. So every child is unique in this way. Every iceberg looks a little bit different. And an individual's child's iceberg is likely to change based on the day and the time in their life and development. And we're not moving forward. There we go. Okay, so how does it help? How does it help when we think about lagging skills or the icebergs or the can't behaviors? Well, it allows us to look for the why and to move beyond things like he just wants attention, she just wants her way, they're being manipulative. They lack motivation. He makes bad choices, she has a bad attitude, and all those other negative assumptions we make. When we move beyond these, we are able to change or shift our lens and see our children differently. Traditional discipline generally assumes behavior is top-down. More often than not, at least in my experience, acting out behaviors are a response to some kind of body-up experience. Again, kids do well if they can. It's our job as parents, caregivers, educators, and providers to look at behavior as a symptom and to understand what it's telling us. If we can do this, we can meet our children, no matter their age or neurotype, through a lens of compassion and empathy, which is the ultimate goal. So let's talk about the brain a little bit, just to understand what's going on a bit more. So Dr. Siegel and Payne described the limbic system or reptilian brain, which they call the downstairs brain, and they use the hand model. And so if you think of the brain, I can't see myself very well, but I think I'm on there. If you think of the brain, here's the stem, here's the brain. Here's the upstairs brain that we'll talk about in a minute, and here's the downstairs brain, the limbic system. The upstairs brain is a thinking part of the brain, or the cerebral cortex. It aids decision-making, emotion and body regulation, insight, flexibility, adaptability, empathy, morality. It's a part of the brain that takes a long time to develop, and it's that part that allows that top-down thinking that we talked about. The limbic system is in here. This is the downstairs brain. Often we need these two to be communicating, but they don't always. So when we think about the limbic system, we think about it like an alarm. There's a great kids book called Hey Warrior, and Karen Young, the author, explains that the limbic system is like a fire alarm. The problem is it reacts without knowing the difference between smoke from burnt toast and smoke because the house is burning down. So I'm sure you've all had that moment where you're cooking and the fire alarm starts going off and everything's fine. That alarm doesn't know the difference. So when the limbic system is overreactive, a child's brain is yelling fire and perceiving threat. And that puts them into fight or flight mode or causes them to flip their lid, as Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson call it. So what happens is the brain stops communicating with itself. The thinking brain goes offline, and the child's limbic system takes over with fight, flight, freeze, faint. And when that happens, a child cannot think clearly. They are not problem solving effectively in that moment. And a child's brain could be naturally overreactive, or the circumstances, the things beneath the iceberg, could lead to that in a given moment. So every child experiences moments of calm, moments of high arousal, and faulty alarms. For some children, especially those with underlying self-regulation challenges due to neurodivergence like autism or ADHD, anxiety, sensory processing concerns, medical or genetic conditions, adoption, trauma, the list kind of goes on, that alarm can go off more frequently. So Dr. Siegel and Bryson explain the brain is changing, changeable, and complex. We have to understand that a child's brain is changing and growing, and we need to manage our expectations and expect challenges that go along with this. It's not one size fits all, and for any child, their brain is always changing. The brain is also changeable. So we think about neuroplasticity. Our brain is always creating new connections. Neurons that fire together wire together. So at the most basic level, this means that the more positive a child's experience, the more positively wired their brain becomes, and vice versa. So if there's a lot of negative feedback, you're getting negative wiring. So our job is to try to approach things in a positive way. Finally, we know the brain is complex, like we talked about. Different parts of the brain are doing different jobs, which helps us when we're thinking about discipline. We can attempt to connect with different parts of the brain through the responses that we give. So we have a choice. If we appeal to the downstairs brain through verbal or non-verbal threats, we create that primitive flight, flee, freeze, faint response. That limbic system, that alarm, can't differentiate between a wild animal and a frustrated parent or educator. If we appeal to the upstairs brain through nurture, empathy, respect, and open, reflective, collaborative communication, we help to create that healthy decision-making, self-regulation, and emotional control in that moment and over time. And this is the key. We might not see change right away, but we start to see change over time. And if we use the models that we're talking about and will talk about, we start to see that change happening. And we also tend to feel better as parents, educators, and caregivers. And so if we talk to the upstairs brain when it's offline, we begin to slowly bring it back online so the brain can communicate with itself. So Dr. Mona Delahooke puts it this way. Instead of focusing on what we do to children, we need to prioritize how we are with them. Instead of focusing on eliminating behaviors, we need to provide children with signals of safety that are personalized to their unique nervous systems. When we view behaviors comprehensively and holistically through that brain-body paradigm, we come to understand the difference between emphasizing behavioral compliance and building the capacity for the child to eventually regulate their emotions themselves. And that emotional regulation, that self-regulation, underlies the behavioral control that we're looking for most often. So I want to take a moment to talk about spoon theory. Some of you may know what this is. The idea is every morning we wake up with a different number of spoons. And you could call this anything, but a lot of people use spoons. And those spoons are based on how well we slept, how we feel that day, whether it's raining or sunny outside, and how your body responds to that, how stressed we are. And throughout that day, we use and replenish spoons based on a variety of things: school stress, hunger, our interactions. Some people love interacting, and having a good social interaction gives them more spoons to work with. Other people, it's draining to interact socially. It uses up spoons. And so some days, by the end of the day, we have a lot of spoons left over, and other days we have few or none. What we can or can't do and how well we do it varies day to day and moment to moment based on the number of spoons we have available at the time of the demand. And that's true for us and for our children. Some days we have the spoons, some days we don't. Same with them. So how can we help? Through attunement and co-regulation. We want to build relationships through connection, empathy, and respect. And I love this visual. When their storm meets our calm, co-regulation occurs. And we're going to talk about this now in a few different ways. Problem is, it's often hardest to be calm and to provide that calm when our kids need us the most. Kids pick up on verbal and nonverbal cues from caregivers that are both conscious and unconscious, which can lead them to feel stabilized or destabilized. And if we're not okay, often they're not okay. Children rely on us to feel safe and regulated. This is extremely challenging anytime we have our own stuff going on, our own stressors. And when they're yelling or screaming or acting up or hitting us, it's very hard to stay calm. And it's even harder during the pandemic. So I like to think about a cup. And, we often think about a full cup being a good thing, but I'm going to kind of flip the metaphor on its head. Right now, none of us are starting with an empty cup. And when you have an empty cup, you have a lot of space to fill up before that cup overflows. And right now, most of us are starting here or maybe here. The pandemic has created extra stressors. And so we only have this much before our cup overflows. The same thing is true for our kids. And a lot of times parents will say to me, well, my child goes from 0 to 60. And the reality is the child's probably sitting at 50, 58, 59, and a lot of things have built up. And then that last straw that might seem so small, that's just the thing that makes it overflow. So they weren't really at 0, they were just holding it together. And that final thing put them at 60, made it overflow. And so we need to remember, for both ourselves and our kids, we're doing the best we can. And right now, often, without any reserves. So the first thing that we need to do to deal with this is learn our own triggers and seek to heal our own wounds. We also need to remember that kids are strategic. My friend Claire Lerner, she says they're not manipulative, they're strategic. They have a need that needs to be met, and they use what they've seen work before. They know it works. So when we think about them pushing our buttons, they're not trying to manipulate us. They might be trying to get a certain reaction, but it's based on that underlying need that they have in the moment, not just a desire to make us crazy most of the time. So when a child's behavior is upsetting, we need to assume that they're having a hard time, not giving us a hard time. And that's a phrase that I say to myself a lot about my own son. He's having a hard time. He's not giving me a hard time. And again, for us and for our kids, we need to remember that the behavior we see is just the tip of that iceberg. So first, we need to self-regulate before we can co-regulate. If we are not calm, we can't help our children be calm. So we can practice the pause. The pause is taking 10 seconds, 20 seconds, as many as you need before you interact with your child, before you say or do anything. In that moment, breathe. That is one of the most helpful things that you can do for yourself, whether it is one deep, slow breath or several. Offer yourself compassion. A lot of people figure out their own form of this. It might be soothing touch or kind self-talk. Some people put their hands on their face, a self-hug. I personally like to put 2 hands on my heart and take a deep breath and just tell myself, you're doing the best you can. You need to find your own emotional balance. As you start to calm, you want to check in on your body language. What is your face saying? Is it calm and relaxed? What do your eyes look like? Are they able to show empathy? Is your brow furrowed? Are you still angry? Have to relax your face. How about your bodies? Are your shoulders down? Are you leaning forward? Is your body open? Are you showing your child that you're there and able to attune? Can you remove distractions? Can you put your phone away? Can you make sure there's nothing else taking up your time while you're trying to calm your child down? Notice your own tone of voice and the rhythm of your voice, and wait to engage until you are calm. If you can't calm down, it is better to take a break or ask for help from someone else in that moment so that you don't react without thinking. Once you're calm, you're ready to co-regulate, and you can do this by providing your child with necessary cues for safety. And those safety cues are going to look a little different child to child. Some kids really, really benefit and love touch. They want a hug. They need us to give them that physical grounding. Others don't want to be touched. They want to have their space when they're upset. Some need eye contact. Some are not comfortable with eye contact. We have to know our kids and how we're responding, and we need to try to read their cues in the moment. Regardless, we want to stay close. If they're trying to hurt us, we need to get ourselves to a safe space and we need to protect ourselves. But we also want to show that we're present as best we can. We need to stay calm. We need to breathe and keep breathing. We want to communicate with our eyes that we're there and we're understanding. Maybe we're nodding our head. We're responding with supportive silence until they're ready to talk. We can say words like, I understand, and express our empathy that way, but often they can't hear us in that moment to hear much more than that. So we just want to show them that we're there and we're present. We want to get below their eye level if we can, so that we're not a threat in that moment. So Dr. Delahook provides us with a list of cues that indicate a child feels unsafe. And this is when they're panicking, they're in a rage, they're melting down, they're tantruming, or they're shutting down. And she talks about 2 different zones, one that is more the rage zone and one that is more the shutdown zone. And she uses colors for this. And she describes a number of different things that we can look for related to facial expression, eyebrows, eye movement, how a child is moving around with their body, their sounds and voice. And again, you'll have access to this, so I'm not going to go over everything. Are they coming at us physically? Are they cowering and freezing? Are they banging into things, or are they moving around comfortably? Are they avoiding interaction? These are things that we want to look at as cues that our child's not okay in that moment. And she says, start with safety. So again, we're thinking about co-regulation and attunement. We prioritize the child's feeling of safety in the relationships. We want to address the causes and triggers beneath the behavior, and then teach the relevant coping strategies. We can't teach when our children are still in a heightened state of arousal. So here's what she suggests for de-escalation. Use respectful and empathic strategies to keep the child and those around them safe. So again, that body language, that presence. Provide cues of safety and stay regulated yourself. One of the things that we can think about is mirror neurons. Even if it seems like we're not doing anything to help our child, if we are calm, we're breathing calmly, our presence is calm, their body is picking up on those cues And slowly their mirror neurons start to respond to ours, and we'll start to see that change in their behavior. Our sense of safety tells their system, hey, you can calm down, you're okay. Might take some time. That message starts to get through. Limit what you say to your child in that moment. Again, they can't necessarily hear you when they're upset. Respect their communication. Provide touch and physical warmth if they desire that. If the child pushes you away, provide comfort through emotional presence and body language instead. Move away slowly and respectfully if they want space. Again, stay low and stay slow. Move to your child's level or beneath them, sit on the floor, and only increase your rate and rhythm of sound and movement based on their language. Sometimes they need us to not be totally calm. They need us to meet their energy level, but we can do that kindly. Just a reminder to please mute if you're on. We can do this very kindly. We don't need to do it by yelling at them, but we might need to raise our voice a little like, hey, I see you've got so much energy right now. Let me help you. And we're expressing, a louder voice, a louder tone to meet and match them if that's what works for them, but we're not doing it with any angry or negative energy. Then think about sensory input. Most people have sensory input that they enjoy, just like they have sensory input that they don't. So think about the sounds, the dimming or the brightening of lights, the smells, the movements, the type of touch your child likes. Maybe they do well with a weighted blanket thrown over them. Maybe they need to just keep moving around freely. Wait to talk later about what helps when they struggle. You can come back to it. If your child's willing, you can have a conversation later. Hey, what would have helped you in that moment? They may or may not know. Other ways you can help understand your child's state of mind. Pay attention to their stress load in real time. So this is kind of like the spoons. Think about extra stress the child might be experiencing. Think about their sleep, whether they've had enough or too much to eat and drink. Think about any underlying health issues going on at the time. There's many different things that could be contributing to their stress level and their well-being or lack thereof. So Dr. Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson use a model called connect and redirect. They say that our relationship with children are central to everything. And you'll see there's a lot of parallel to Dr. Mona Delahooke's way of moving forward with this. They say when we discipline, we want to do so lovingly to foster that positive connection and set the stage for future relationships, positive decision making, and brain development. It says connection should be combined with clear, firm boundaries that create structure. This is a question I get often. Positive parenting is not permissive parenting. We still set the boundaries. We still create structure. We just do so kindly. So, in order to connect and co-regulate, they recommend try an appropriate friendly touch. So we're hearing that again. Get down on the child's level, below their eye line if you can, without towering above. When the children bring their eyes down, it also brings their energy level down. It starts to create calm. Use soothing, gentle, and empathic language to help calm the child. If it's appropriate, name the emotion. Say things like, I know, I see, you're really upset, I'm here. Show that you care, even if you don't know exactly what's going on. If your child will allow it, make eye contact to help them calm down. You'll do this before you move on to the redirect step. It's first connect. So some other ways to connect in the moment and outside of the moment that reconfirm it is not passive parenting. We're going to say yes more than we say no, but with conditions. So it might be, yeah, we can read another story. We'll do it after lunch, right? They want it right then and there. You're setting the boundary of not now. Positive phrasing instead of negative. So instead of don't throw the ball in the living room, hey, you're so good at throwing the ball in the yard. Let's go out. Express confidence. I know you'll do a great job starting on your homework. You have your paper with the directions to follow, right? Offer help and set limits. I see you're having trouble agreeing on the rules of the game. We can't mess it up for everyone by knocking over the pieces. I'll help you set it back up and we'll make a plan. Avoid criticism. This is a big one. It's really easy to criticize when we're starting to get frustrated. So when you point out what didn't go well, focus on the behavior, not on the child. It might be something like, I know you're kind. I understand you were tired and lost your temper, but we can't hit our dog. Use humor or warmth. With a warm voice, relaxed body and face, please join the family at the table now. Here's your plate. Or it might be silly. Let's try a silly walk to the table and make silly sounds until we get there. Encourage empathy. Instead of demanding and commanding, you want to engage that upstairs brain. So it might be something, instead of stop being mean to your sibling, try, did you notice how your sibling's face looked when you called them stupid? You're talking to their brain, you're having them tune in. That would be usable in a moment when they're a little calmer and a little bit more regulated. So then, once you've got a child calm, you've been able to have those connected moments, that's when you move on to redirect or to the discipline step. Again, discipline is teaching. It means to learn, or to teach rather. We want them to learn. So we're going to ask 3 questions of ourselves. Why did my child act this way? So what was happening beneath the tip of the iceberg? And we might not always know. That's why we have those lagging skills to look at. You can think about those different levels that could be impacting things. Then, what lesson do I want to teach? And how can I best teach it? Remember, how we say things is just as important as what we say. And we want to think about 2 principles. We want to wait until the child is ready, and we want to be consistent but not rigid. The ultimate goal of redirect is to teach mindsight. Mindsight is our capacity to understand our own mind and the minds of others, to understand what was happening in the moment. So we want to teach insight. We want to help kids understand their own feelings and their responses to the difficult situations. What happened and why? We want to teach them empathy. We want to let them practice reflecting on how their actions impact others. And then we want to teach them how to repair. We want to ask kids what they can do to make things right. This is discipline. Some other discipline guidance. Dr. Siegel and Payne say, converse. Instead of giving consequences, initiate a conversation. Instead of, I can't believe you knocked over those blocks, go to timeout. Try, can you tell me what happened here? Let them tell us what went wrong. Be consistent but not rigid. Allow some flexibility for when and how things happen. We do have to get these math problems done today, but I see it's too much for you right now. Why don't you go to the bathroom and get a drink? We'll try again after. And then we repair ruptures, and this is key. They learn from us making mistakes and making them better. If we think we handled a situation poorly, we should say so, apologize, and seek forgiveness. So Dr. Siegel and Payne offer the anagram redirect. Reduce words, embrace emotions, describe, don't preach, involve the child in the discipline, reframe a no into a conditional yes, emphasize the positive, catch your child doing well whenever you can. I love how you worked with your friend on that project. When you can, praise the effort, not just the outcome. Ultimately, that will build what we call growth mindset. That will help our kids do well. We want to praise the effort, the work, the time they're putting in, more than that final outcome. It isn't just about the final product or the final behavior. It's how hard they're working along the way, the effort, the attempt. Creatively approach the situation. Be silly, get moving, make up a song or dance. Try to make it fun as you're disciplining, and then teach those mindsight tools. These might include teaching a child to go to a peaceful place in their imaginations when they're upset. Narrating the present moment. Help the child be both the actor experiencing the moment and the director watching objectively to gain insight and change it for next time if they can't for that time. Teach them to take control of upsetting thoughts or images. So this always reminds me of the Boggarts in Harry Potter, if you're familiar. It can help kids change the picture in their mind. You feel scared to go to the bathroom because there could be a monster in there? What if we make that monster less scary by imagining him in a tutu, a cowboy hat, high heels, and a snorkel? Maybe they draw that. Their monster's not so scary anymore. And teach them about the hand model and flipping their lid. Some other tips that often help. Provide choices within the boundary you've set. For a toddler, this might look like, I know you want to keep playing. We'll play again tomorrow morning. It's time for bath now. You can walk to the bathroom yourself, or I can carry you there. What would you like? For a teenager, it might be, yeah, you can go out with your friends this weekend. Would you like to go out Friday night or Saturday night? Use structure and schedules. Use timers, countdowns to help with transitions. Be clear about limits ahead of time. This is huge. When we can set expectations and set limits, our kids know what to expect. Sometimes things fall apart. We have to acknowledge the disappointment when it does. We also want to know our children's preferred and non-preferred activities. It helps us when we know what they like to help identify when transitions are going to be hard. It is hard to transition from something they love to something they don't, and we have to be prepared for that. We want to join with our children before transitions if we can. Maybe they're playing a video game. Sit down with them, play with them a little bit, ask them what's going on before you simply ask them to transition. Okay, so Dr. Mona Delahooke's model and Dan Siegel's model, they tend to work with little kids as well as they do with older kids. Dr. Ross Green's model can be modified for younger children, but people often say, well, how do you do this with them? And it is a little bit different. So Ross Green uses Plan B and the collaborative and proactive solutions approach. So he proposes 3 options for unsolved problems. You have a problem, things are not working. You have 3 choices. You can impose your will, you can work out a solution that's realistic and mutually satisfactory, which he calls Plan B, or Plan C, drop the expectation completely, at least for now. This works for children of all ages. The problem solving that we're going to get to is a little harder with little ones, but the idea of deciding, am I imposing my will? Does it have to be my way right now? Usually we only do that if there's a safety concern. Do we look for a solution that works? Or, you know what, is this something that I just don't need to address right now? I don't love that it's happening, but it's no big deal. It's a small thing. We'll get back to it later. So Plan B has 3 steps. The empathy step. We want to gather information and understand our child's concern or the given problem. Then we want to define the problem. Be specific about your concern as the parent or caregiver, or educator, provider, and our perspective on the same problem. Then we want to invite the child to brainstorm solutions with us that are realistic and mutually satisfactory. So we start with the empathy step, and we need to understand first what true empathy is. So Brené Brown says, empathy is communicating that incredibly healing message of you're not alone. You're not alone. So this step begins with a neutral observation and continues with an initial inquiry. I've noticed, what's up? I've noticed that you're having trouble completing your homework lately. What's up? I've noticed it's been hard to come to the dinner table lately. What's up? I've noticed you've been playing by yourself a lot this week. What's up? There's interest, there's empathy, there's a lack of judgment. You can do this with kids most ages. Obviously, if they don't have words, some of this detective work falls to us and we have to try to guess a little bit, but we want to be careful in that too. We don't want to assume. And as we said, we don't want to assume what's going on. We want to clarify without drilling our kids. We want to focus on the who, what, when, where, and why of the unsolved problems with comments like, how so? Say more. I'm confused. We really want to try to understand. It takes us beyond simply showing empathy in the moment into that active step of understanding and problem solving. Lots of times we get an I don't know response, particularly when you start to do collaborative problem solving for the first time and in the early stages. So we need to allow time and space for the child to reflect and really consider the matter, and it means allowing space for silence or time to process. If we really get to the point that the child can't answer, we can then attempt that educated guessing, hypothesis testing. Once we do that, we come to step 2, which is define the problem. It usually begins with a statement like, my concern is, or the thing is. So with the struggling to complete work, my concern is that you're missing out on lots of learning and getting lower grades because the work is not finished, or not engaging with the family. My concern is that you're missing out on family interactions and discussions, playing alone. My concern is that you're having trouble getting along with your siblings and you end up playing a lot by yourself. That'd be okay if they weren't having trouble getting along and it wasn't becoming a problem for the family. So then we go to the invitation. Now that your child's concern and your own are out on the table, it's time for that final step, the brainstorming step where you come up with possible solutions. It's important for your child to understand that this is happening together. You're problem solving with your child, not doing it for them. So you try a statement like, let's think about how we can solve this problem. Then you recap the concerns. I wonder if there's a way to help you with your homework so it doesn't take you so long and make you mad, but still give you some practice with the skills. We always want to give the child the first chance to propose a solution, then share our own. Every possible solution, even if you know it's not realistic, should be considered and discussed together to decide if it's mutually agreeable and if it is realistic. We need to set the limits there. It has to work for us too, and that's where the discipline comes in. We then want to keep working until we have a solution that's realistic and mutually agreeable. And once we do, we finish with a statement like, it sounds like the solution works for you. It also works for me. Should we give it a try? And if it doesn't work, we'll talk some more and try another one until we find one that does. It's something that is always evolving. It's not a done deal. So people then ask me a lot, as I mentioned earlier, about logical or natural consequences. Logical or natural consequences still happen when children struggle. Sometimes these consequences may be based in the limits we set, like, I understand you're sad that we have to clean up the game, but since we can't play safely, we'll have to try again tomorrow instead. Or it might be something that's out of our control, like child's being left out because they said something that someone else perceived as unkind. Our job is to help kids understand why and how these consequences occur, to empathize with their feelings about the consequences, and then, when it's appropriate, to help them problem solve to avoid that same consequence in the future. People also ask me, well, what about rewards? Aren't rewards okay? Punishment's not okay, but can't we give them a present to help them move forward or have them work for an incentive? For many children, rewards lead to shame. If there are lagging skills, unmet needs, or difficulties beneath the tip of the iceberg that's making it too hard for them to earn it, they end up feeling bad. If they see siblings or peers at school earning a reward and they're not, or they're always on the behavior chart in yellow or red, and they're seeing everyone else in green, the other kids see that too, and they internalize that shame. So, like with punishment, we might see a desired outcome in a change in behavior, but not for those right reasons. If the child's behaving simply to earn rewards, they're not learning, developing empathy, or gaining insight. Of course, we can sometimes do special things as a family because of hard work, but we don't want to set it up that if they behave a certain way for a certain period of time, then they get a reward because they might not be able to do it, and then it's particularly hard for them. We need to also remember, children are individuals with their own thoughts, feelings, wishes, needs, and ideas, no matter how little they are. So one way to make sure you're disciplining with empathy is to ask yourself whether you'd want to be treated the same way that you're treating your child. Ask yourself, how would I feel if my spouse or friend or colleague or boss spoke to me or acted towards me the way that I'm acting towards my child right now? It's not our job as parents, caregivers, educators, and providers to control. It's our job to support, guide, and nurture. We don't like to be controlled. Neither do they. So what we model in our own behavior is very often more important than our words. If we can show them empathy, they're more likely to be empathic themselves. So then I get the question, what if I mess up? Guess what? You will. You are human. You will mess up all the time. I tell parents who I work with, I teach this and I get it wrong with my own child all the time. And that happens because emotions get involved. It's hard to stay calm. You make mistakes even if you know this stuff and work hard at it. So then what do? The power is in the repair. The repair is in many ways the most important piece of this. When we get it wrong, we have to model taking responsibility. To ask for a do-over. Tell your child what you said or how you acted doesn't actually feel right to you. It can happen in the moment or later when you've calmed down a little bit. Apologize. It is okay to apologize. It is a great model for them. Do it over and over and over again. If you made a rash threat or threw out a punishment or said something unkind, it is okay to change your mind. Now, this gets a little funny with limit setting. We don't want our kids to think that they can coerce us into changing our mind, that if they ask enough times, that limit is going to change. This is more about you taking responsibility and saying, hey, I was angry. I was not thinking clearly. That wasn't fair to you. I'm going to change that. Teach growth mindset. We all make mistakes. Parents, kids, teachers, providers, everybody. I like the phrasing fail is the first attempt in learning for us and for our kids. We fail, they fail, it's how we learn. And most importantly, follow the 5-to-1 rule. So for every one negative reaction, try for 5 positives. And that they don't have to be big. These are not grand gestures, but you've had a negative interaction, look for a hug, look for an opportunity to laugh or make a joke, an opportunity to praise or compliment. Just want to try to show them there's more good than bad in the relationship. Can also help outside of those tough moments by building connection in every interaction we have. And that also allows us to shift our lens and see our kids differently. When we see them differently, we come at the discipline with much more empathy in the first place. So get to know your child. Marvel at who they are. Pay attention to their strengths and their interests and their skills. We often don't slow down and do this. Notice how they think and how they speak and how they learn. It can be fascinating. Reflect on their growth. Also, look for their positive mirror traits. Often when something's wrong, we're only looking at the negative, like they can't focus on their homework very well. But if we can notice that huge Lego structure they spent all day working on, or that picture they drew, or that computer programming that they did, because they can focus on that, what they're doing is incredible. Engage with them around their interests and share your own. Really take the time to listen to them. And if at all possible, set daily one-on-one time with your child. If it's not possible, do it as much as you can. Let them know it's coming. Set it as an expectation. During this time, let them lead the play. Let them lead the activity. And you can do this with any age child. Put the electronics away, ideally. Give each other full attention. Don't allow interruptions unless it's an emergency. And it can be as little as 10 minutes a day that you build upon. If you really are having trouble connecting with your child, think back to the day that your child was born and how helpless they were. The reality is that they need us now as much as they do then, even if their behavior is pushing us away. Use your child's strengths, interests, and skills to offset vulnerabilities, to help build their self-esteem, to create a stronger connection between you as you engage with them, to help manage those transitions. You know, a transition is hard. How can you bring in a preferred task or interest into it? Maybe it's just part of a conversation. Can use it to help them cool down during or after difficult moments, and to help aid repair when you mess up. We also want to think about self-esteem. Another benefit of positive discipline is the building of self-esteem. As we've said, negative discipline can feel traumatic. Children internalize the negative messages. They see themselves, not just their behaviors, as bad, and it negatively wires their brain. So if we can build their self-esteem with our positive messages and language, doing the opposite. The way we speak to our children matters. The words we use matter. Our words become their inner dialogue. It's a little voice in their head. Our words steer our children to who they'll become. So if we tell them they're strong, they're likely to show that strength. If we tell them they're weak, they're likely to see themselves that way and give up. This is seen both in the short term and the long term. And I'm not going to show you the video on this page, but I'm going to tell you about it. So Dr. Emoto is a scientist who researched the power of words. And people always look at me like, yeah, no way. You can find these videos on YouTube. You'll have this here. He spoke to water that was crystallizing and forming icicles and snowflakes, essentially. And he would send different messages like, you're beautiful, or I love you. And you would get these beautiful, beautiful shapes and structures. But he would also say, you're ugly, I hate you, and other kinds of negative words. And you'd see holes and deformities and how these were put together. It gives me chills even when I think about it. He also used fermenting rice, and he had one jar of rice that he ignored entirely, and that one rotted terribly. He had another that he sent negative messages to with words, and that began to ferment, but not very well. And then he said kind words to other rice, and it fermented beautifully. And this has been repeated over and over and over again. The words we use, the energy we give matters. So, to remember to be kind to ourselves too. Self-care and self-compassion for caregivers are necessary, especially right now during the pandemic. We need to remember that we're better people and better parents, caregivers, educators, and providers when we take care of ourselves. People always tell me I don't have time. I get it. It is hard. I'm a working mom. It is not easy to find time. Self-care looks different for every person. So you need to ask yourself what rejuvenates you. And then if you need to, look 10 minutes of doing something that you love. Ideally something longer, but if you can't, even those quick ones can make a difference. Prioritize it for yourself and for the other adults in your child's life. It actually helps you parent better if you take that time for you. Also practice self-compassion, which is way easier said than done. Ask yourself, would I speak to a friend the way I'm speaking to myself right now? Or would I be as hard on my friend for messing up as I am on myself? We are most unkind to ourselves. The self-esteem, self-compassion research proves it. We are very unkind to ourselves, far more unkind than we are to others. So we want to treat ourselves with the same compassion that we're learning to treat our child with. And we have to remember our limbic systems get overreactive too, particularly if we're tired, hungry, stressed, or overwhelmed. So we want to forgive our mistakes and allow that chance for repairs. So just want to talk about a couple additional materials that I really love and recommend. Generation Mindful has the Time In Toolkit. I mentioned Time In before, which is a great alternative to Time Out. It's a time when we say, okay, you're having a hard time. I'm going to sit with you. I'm going to come with you. I'm going to be with you. And you can create this little calming corner and go there and have relaxing things to do. Use their chart to identify emotions and cool down techniques. Have one in my son's room where he has art supplies and books, and we go there when we need to just calm down and talk. There's also a Big Life Journal, and they're wonderful. They have them for all different ages and different things that you want to work on, like growth mindset, self-esteem, resilience. Excellent, excellent resources. Great for educators, providers, and kiddos. And no, I'm not getting paid to say any of this. I really personally like these materials. And then I want to teach you, as we wrap up, a few techniques for calming down. One of my favorites, when I only have a couple moments, is a sensory grounding. And this is something that you can use or teach your child. And so you start with a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And you can repeat this as you go through each step. Look around for 5 things you see, any 5 things. Then 4 things you feel physically. Clothes on your body, your hair against your face, your seat underneath your bottom, anything that you feel. 3 things you hear, the buzzing of your computer, my voice, whatever you hear. If you can, 2 things you smell, and 1 thing you taste. Those can be a little harder. Ultimately, it's not the number or hitting every sense that matters. It's bringing yourself into your body in the moment, which is a mindfulness practice. There's also the 4-7-8 exercise. So when you do this, you want to exhale through your mouth, making a whoosh sound. So you begin by closing your mouth and inhaling quietly through your nose as you count to 4. Then you hold your breath for a count of 7. And then you exhale completely through your mouth, making a whoosh sound to a count of 8. You may not get the count right every time, that's okay. You can repeat that cycle 4 times. And then one of my favorites that I use, but also teach to kids, is the hot chocolate breath. You can do this, you can use hot chocolate or your favorite drink. Close your eyes if you wish. Pretend you're holding a warm mug of your favorite drink in your hand, favorite hot drink. Breathe in slowly through your nose and focus on the delicious smell. Blow out slowly to cool the hot chocolate or the latte, whatever it might be, but don't blow so hard that you blow off the whipped cream, foam, marshmallows, or other toppings. Repeat this over and over until you feel calm. Again, this is mindful. It brings you into the moment through senses. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the opportunity to speak with you. As I said, you'll be getting the slideshow, and there's a list of resources that you can also look at as you move forward through them on your own. And I think now we're opening up for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Halpern. That was incredible. Really appreciate it. I know for my 5-year-old and 2.5-year-old, I'm like jotting down a whole notebook of notes, like literally, I really appreciate it. If you guys have a question, please feel free to take yourself off mute and ask it, or you're welcome to ask it in the chat. So I'll open it up now for a Q&A.
Hi, my name is Diana. Thank you so much for your wonderful, wonderful presentation. I have a quick question because, oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question to speak about behavioral tools and techniques as not being the best. So for example, if you behave this way, then you get this. And I wonder, first of all, if you have alternative solutions to behavioral modifications, and two, also, what if it's not you behave this way and then you get this, but you are, we're balancing out privileges and responsibilities, and you're wanting all these privileges like screen time, or, well, mostly screen time is what kids want these days. But if you want these privileges, you can't have zero responsibilities. So as long as you're able to behave in a collaborative manner and fulfill your responsibilities at home, it's fair that you should also enjoy the privileges. Otherwise, you're not earning the privileges. I wonder what your thoughts are about those two.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, there is a move away in this paradigm from the traditional behavioral model of rewards and punishments, and the alternatives are the things that we talked about. So it's using the models of beyond behavior, or connect and redirect, or collaborative problem solving. You're not so much focused on, I have to get them to behave a certain way and I'm going to use that reward or punishment to do it. You're much more focused on creating that connection and teaching. And so it is a move for many parents. And I find myself having to stop myself a lot of the time from making those kind of threats. So it's a move away from that. There is a difference. What you're talking about is not punishment. Having expectations in the home. You get screen time, but in order to begin your screen time each day, these responsibilities need to be completed. And so it's not, okay, that's it. You've done such horrible things, you don't get screen time. Or you only earn it if you get this grade or something like that. But rather, we have these expectations at home. These are your responsibilities. Ideally, that's something that you agree to together. You work on responsibilities that feel reasonable to you and reasonable to your child. And then when those are done each day, or maybe there's a certain time of day that they're expected to be done, that's when they get to move into their screen time. And if they're not done, that screen time gets pushed back until those things are done. And if they never get done, then that time for screen time is not there. That becomes much more of a natural or logical consequence. It's not you saying, I'm punishing you, you're not getting it, but rather, yeah, you can have it. We just have to get these things done first. That's the expectation and the rule in our household. Do you understand the difference?
Yes, that makes sense. And so basically the model doesn't focus at all on having children do certain things.
It's not about
at certain times. And I understand that, I absolutely do. I mean, I'm a parent and also a clinician, so I definitely, and I use a lot of this model, but I also use parts of behavioral modification. And so I was very curious to know how they could be integrated or not into this model, because I strongly believe from a personal standpoint in it, in the positive parenting.
And what's hard is, right, as we said, punishment and reward can work. We can get the behaviors we want to see. But sometimes in the process, we're doing a lot of damage and we're not actually teaching what needs to be taught. And so having responsibilities, having certain behavioral expectations in your home is fine. When there's not a follow through, that's when you would come to the table, perhaps using Ross Green's model, and talk about, hey, I've noticed this isn't getting done. What's up? And then problem solving around that responsibility. But having expectations and boundaries at home is fine. It's just that we're not focusing on the negative behaviors. We're not focusing on the negative behavior as the reason for a punishment or the reason for the reward if it doesn't happen. Instead, we're saying, hey, there's rules, there's expectations. If they're not happening, let's talk about it. Let's figure it out. Let's problem solve. And then you're teaching what needs to be taught. You're developing those mindset tools and teaching, that empathy or that lesson that you want taught in the moment.
That makes perfect sense. So you're basically setting up the structure outside of the moment where everything is emotionally charged, and then in the moment focus on the relationship.
Yes, exactly. And always focusing on the relationship.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great question. I have a few in the queue, so I'm going to ask on their behalf. So Angela asks, and I love this question, what advice do you have if you want to start practicing this approach to parenting, but your spouse isn't totally on board and is a little bit more old school in discipline?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have a lot of families where one parent will start coming to me and the other is not so on board. And honestly, it is much, much harder when you have one parent following this model and another parent following the other. So you can begin by trying to start modeling it yourself and letting your spouse see, like, hey, I kind of like that. ideally, you get yourself to a parenting coach so that your spouse could hear why this works, or you'd have him or her read the research and, here, like, instead of listening to me, read this, look at this from the experts. And these are all, in this resource list here, where you might have to kind of buy them into it slowly. Like, hey, let me read you this excerpt. Here's what it says. It's really hard, and I really empathize with you for this. You can begin to implement it yourself. You can work on that connection, even if you're doing it a little bit. Or let's say for teachers or providers where parents aren't on board, even that little bit that you do outside of the home makes a difference. So that one parent doing it can make a difference. It just makes it harder when you don't have that united front.
Thank you, Dr. Halpern. All right, next question from Chris. What about a teenager who doesn't like to communicate? He can, but resistant. It's hard to meet him with this kind of help when he does not at all respond. So I feel every interaction is just me talking.
Yeah. So that's really hard. And that happens a lot when these steps are just beginning, right? Especially if it's new. Kids are like, what is this? Where did this come from? What is my parent up to? They're looking for like, what's the catch? And it can take time. And so you might need to keep those words small. And it may be that you don't have a lot of the conversation. You might not get into a lot of the collaborative problem solving. You might use one of the other models instead, where it's less about the words and more about your approach. And so you're changing your behavior in the interaction well before your teenager changes theirs. And I've seen parents start to use collaborative problem solving and do it all through text. If their kid won't have a conversation but's willing to text or email or some other way of communicating, that is okay too. And so it's not one size fits all. And if it really becomes a struggle, again, having a parent coach who can help you with your unique situation, who can say, okay, let's look at this. How about we try this? All right, let's tweak that, right? Because this is a general model, and every person needs to be able to tweak it for their own kid, and it's not easy to do. And so outside help, a pair of eyes that are more neutral, can make a difference there. But you can, again, begin with what you're doing. He may not change right away. He might be wondering what you're up to, but you can change your approach. And so the models work for that even before you get to that communication and collaborative problem solving.
Thank you, Dr. Halpern. I think, Melissa, that kind of answers your question too. So I'm going to move to the next question from Amy. My 13-year-old son has a behavior issue around playing games. When he loses or his time is up, he explodes and sometimes breaks something. It is impossible to talk to him when he is raging. He also does not want to talk or communicate. So I know this is kind of in lines with that, but I know gaming is a big topic I'd love for you to cover.
Yeah. So this is a really, really hard one, right? Kids want a game and then they get completely thrown off by the fact that they're gaming when it doesn't go the way that they want or when it's time to stop. And so there's a couple layers to this. One is very clear rules about when and how a child can game, when they're allowed to. And you can work on that together when you create a schedule or structure, and lots of warnings for time that's coming up, countdowns, timers. Doesn't work on its own, but it's a start to create some structure around there. Then I would work on emotional regulation outside of the moment. So when you're starting to feel upset, what do? And beginning to understand and explore how your child calms down, and teaching some of those coping skills when your child is not enraged. And I'm going to say that keeping in mind that as adults, many of us are still working on those coping skills ourselves, right? We may not blow up over a video game, but we have things that we blow up for. And then again, we're going to look for the why beneath the behavior. So why is that such an explosion for him? Well, he lost the game. It didn't go how he wanted. Something went wrong and he could not handle that emotion. So we want to attune to the emotion. We want to be present. We don't need to say a lot, but this is where our presence comes in. We're there, we're nodding, we're understanding. Instead of getting angry that he's angry yet again at a game where he could have foreseen that this would go wrong, we're there, we're present, we're empathizing with the emotion in the moment. It doesn't need to be conversation beyond being present. And I get it. It sucks when it doesn't go the way you want. I'm so sorry, right? We're there. And they might look at us again like we're crazy or be like, yeah, of course, mom or dad, yeah. But we're showing them we're here, we're attuned. And part of this model really pushes us to not be scared of the meltdown and the emotion. Obviously, if there's danger, physical danger, we need to protect the situation and protect ourselves and do everything we can to prevent, if there's stuff around that he could easily break, I'd probably put like really soft things around that area that he could grab onto so that whatever he's grabbing, maybe even fidgets or poppets or something that he could use when that frustration comes. But as long as we're not in danger and they're not in danger, don't be scared of the meltdown. That's his way of showing the emotion. It's too much for him. And if we stay there and we co-regulate, we start to teach the skills by our own calm that he needs or she needs.
Really good question. Next question is from Anna. And Anna, I feel like you and I live parallel lives. So I really like this one. I have a toddler and a 5-year-old where they have issues listening. I ask, please come to the dinner table, and they don't for various reasons. They're playing, distracted, etc. I ask again and still no action. I then do the 1, 2, 3 methodology. And if by 3, I give them a timeout, which I don't like doing. Can you offer another framework of advice on the best way to deal with children who are not listening?
Yeah. So I don't know that I put this in there, but another wonderful book for all ages, and they have different ages of it, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, How to Listen So Kids Will Talk. And they've got it for toddlers and tweens and teens and all the different ages. And there's more ideas there. But we have to first decide, like, is this a plan B? Is this something that we want to problem solve? Or is this a plan C? Do we really need them to come and sit at the table? If so, for how long, when, what are the rules for that? And then it begins with us creating some structure. All right, what's happening right before dinner? How can I start to support that transition? And you can think about this with any time of day. What are the things that get in the way? If they're doing X before dinner, that transition is that much harder. But if they're doing Y, it's a little bit easier. And then how can I help them transition? They might need something a little bit more firm than, can you please come to the table? It may need to be, okay, guys, time for dinner. Here I come. Let's have a little dance party. And then we're going to dance our way to the table. Right. And I think that was even one of the models, one of the items that we used as a model. You have to kind of get creative. What's going to help in that moment? When they're that little, there also may be a measure of, picking them up. So the choice might be, okay, it's time for dinner. You can come now, or I'm going to carry you. Which would you like? And you're giving them a little bit of control in that choice. And if they don't come, okay, I know you don't want me to, but I'm going to pick you up. You needed a little help with this. And you might be carrying them kicking and screaming, but you show them that the limit is firm. You stay calm and kind. And that, again, is going to be the key. I give a lot of warnings that it's about time for the transition. You want to make sure that they know it's coming. It shouldn't come as a surprise. You want to create that structure and expectation as much as possible, and then aid them through it. That not listening is coming because they're into something else. It's fun for them. Dinner is not as important to them. So if we want to make it a priority, we have to make it fun and we have to help them.
Really great question. Thank you for that. I just put a link to that book that you mentioned too in the chat if anybody wants it. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but if anybody else has additional questions, please feel free to ask.
I was going to ask, I have a just turned 1-year-old, and so I'm just starting to see the first signs of like strong reactions. And so this is a little bit younger, I know, than maybe some of the ages you've been talking about, but even at these early stages when they start to emotionally respond to different things, being angry that something's taken away or not getting the food that they would rather have more of, any suggestions on just like early good communication?
Yeah. So it's a tough age, right? Because they're also kind of digging in and figuring out what they like and kind of what they're into in that moment. And so I don't know, another person that I love is Janet Lansbury, and she's very focused on those little ones, which can be absolutely wonderful. But the tools are the same. You just have to modify for age. So what's going on? What are they really feeling? What are they trying to tell us in that moment with that behavior, with their choices or their lack thereof? And how do we want to respond in a given moment to that? What do we want to teach them? What lesson? is it that we have in mind? And is this something that we really care about right now? Or do we let a few of them go because they're really not a big deal and they're just kind of figuring out who they are and exploring their world? Does that answer it for you?
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of what I've deferred to, because I know they're just kind of like learning what that even means to respond those different ways. Yeah, it's just kind of hard to figure out, like, when is the point that I need to be more intentional about giving them a tool, or just talking it through.
I think, again, we go to the modeling, right? You're modeling with your own behavior, those coping skills and what to do when they're disappointed and when they can't do something. And you have to decide, and then this is different for every situation and every family, what are those things that there is a clear limit or a clear boundary that you're going to hold. And then you have to help them deal with the emotion that comes up around that limit or that boundary.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Dr. Halpern. I've got a question that I could simply paraphrase as, what is the best advice you could give to someone who is a parent of a neuroatypical child, who is trying to explain that experience to someone in your child's life who is not a parent of a neuroatypical child, who's someone who frankly just doesn't get it, and not a spouse? I guess, to give you, I promise not to prattle along, but to give you a clear example, pretend your child is participating in youth sports and they're being coached by someone's dad,
Yeah.
and your kid loses the ball in the course of play, and your kid struggles with distress regulation and goes hostile, and the coach is all of a sudden like, your kid made this choice to be bad and now I've got to deal with it. And you're kind of trying to get them into some of the thinking you're talking about, understanding this is a coach volunteer, this isn't a teacher, this isn't a counselor. I appreciate you can't fix all of this in a 30-second talk, but what is like your elevator pitch, or your 5 or 10 things you try to say?
Yeah, so that is such a good question. And we could do a whole separate presentation on neurodivergence and how to deal with these kiddos, although these tools work really well for them. You are right. And so, as parents, I think part of what we need to decide is, how much do we want to protect our kids from situations like that? And if there's someone who doesn't get it and isn't getting it over and over that again, is that the right space for them? That would be my first question. If not, if you want to keep them there and we know it's a tough space, is it a parent always being around to get the kid out of the moment and go do the regulation that needs to happen? But if it's just, how do I pitch this, if that's kind of the basic question there, I would just try an overview of the brain model and explaining, okay, we've got neurotypical to neurodivergent when we think about neurodiversity, and every single brain is different and every single brain is okay. And within that, we have strengths and vulnerabilities, right? And, ask the coach, maybe you don't want to tell me, but think for a minute, like, what's really hard for you? What are your vulnerabilities? And what makes you lose it? Well, for him, that little alarm system goes off in that moment, and it's like his brain is on fire. He can't think clearly. That is what his brain responds to, and it is on fire. And when you yell and scream and get upset, you are fanning those flames and they are getting higher. Let me show you how to put them out. And, he may or may not take to it, but that's kind of where I would try to go if I was trying to convince somebody who isn't particularly open to engaging around it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope that helps.
I have another great question in the chat. These are so good. This is from Ellen. I give a lot of praise for behavior and action done well, but I'm starting to notice that both of my kids tend to seek out praise to what I'm starting to question on whether it's unhealthy levels. I'm afraid that there will be a point where they're unable to function without praise.
Wow. Yeah, okay. So I'd be curious what kind of praise they're seeking out and why. So we kind of move into like love languages, if you buy into that idea. And some kids like need words of affirmation. So I would start thinking about what kind of praise you want to give, and kind of recognizing they may not get it in other places, and so they may be coming to you because they're not getting enough of it at school, or they're not getting enough of it somewhere else. And I kind of go to the idea, like, we can't spoil our kids with affection. We need to be careful with the praise that we give. If we spend all of our time in telling our kids how smart, how beautiful, how how they're the best at something, like that may be unhealthy for them because that expectation is not realistic when they're with other people. Then they start to compare themselves. But if we look at, you work so hard and I see it every day, or I love to be with you, it makes my heart happy. And we give those affirmations that are very positive, but it's not praise for something specific. It's more about their general being, their general presence, their, I am always so amazed at your kindness. You think so hard about others and how they feel, right? And so you're not praising something so specific that they feel like they have to live up to some unrealistic expectation, but you're affirming their need for being seen. And I would look at it that way, that when kids are seeking praise, they're needing to be seen and potentially needing more connection. So I would look for those ways to connect and enjoy and create positive situations. And then the praise that can come out in those moments can be much more general and growth mindset based, as opposed to, specific to, oh, that's the best picture you've ever made, right? It might be more like, oh, how did you think of that? That was such an interesting idea. I never would have thought of that myself. And so it's shifting the language of praise, if that makes sense.
So good.
I was the person who actually asked that question. I can have a quick follow-up, if that's
Yeah.
all right. I think you pointed out a lot of really helpful things, and I agree with you completely. And I think I honestly vacillate between doing the right and the wrong from what you're essentially describing, and trying to big picture talk about the larger positives as opposed to tuning into the specifics.
Yeah.
Although I do sometimes do that. And I think one of the things that I struggle with in particular, and I'd be curious your take on that, is for one of my two kids, she really does excel at certain things, and repeatedly teachers keep relaying to me how, quite frankly, extraordinary or out of the typical, out of bounds it can be. So I struggle with how to frame when she's doing a really good job in those particular fields and aspects of her life, because she is, I'm not trying to say my child is the best, most amazing child ever, but it is out of the ordinary for certain aspects of typical development for the stage.
Yeah.
And on the, I guess that's the biggest thing that I'm thinking about. I guess there's the follow-up also. One of the things that I notice in particular terms of the love, and maybe you're right, maybe she's not getting it through school, is she'll often say, "Do you love me, mommy?" And I probably say, "I love you 100 times throughout the day." And I often ask, "Well, what do you think about that?
Yeah.
Do you think mommy loves you?" Of course. And she'll respond, "Of course, you love me to the moon and back and beyond."
Yeah. So she's needing reassurance there. I'd be curious, like, I've noticed that you've been asking me that a lot. What's up? Right? Or I'm wondering what's on your mind. It sounds like you're needing me to tell you that a lot. I'm happy to. Just wondering what's going on. See if she can tell you. She may not. She may be a kid who needs, again, those words of affirmation, right? If we think about love languages, she needs to hear how loved she is and how seen she is. And I think it's okay. Of course I love you. And it's also okay to say, what's going on here? And in terms of those strengths, if she is standing out, yes, that's going to get pointed out a lot. And I think, to kind of praise her where she needs it, but also to kind of even the playing field, if that's what you were getting at with your other child, really thinking about, like, we all have strengths and we all have vulnerabilities. And sometimes we have something that's such a special, singular strength that really stands out. And that's very, very cool. And we're so lucky to have that, and we can work on it. And it's our job to nurture it and really focus on, like, I like how hard you're working at that to get even better, and go back to the effort that's being put into it, along the way, and how she's nurturing it. And then with your other child, focusing similarly on what they're nurturing and working on for growth.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Sure, my pleasure.
I think we have time for one more question, and it was in the chat from Rana. I have a really good one. Okay. I find that at the beginning of the pandemic, my methodology was aligned with the methods discussed. At this juncture, however, the lingering pandemic has tested my mettle, stemming resilience. While I remain calm, I think as best as possible, my tone can be coarse in response to the rage and anger displayed by my children. Would you be able to speak more on self-regulation, self-care, self-compassion, and how they help to buoy as we navigate difficult times in life while being committed to the approach of positive parenting?
So this is the question of the time, right? How do we take care of ourselves when we are spread thin? So this is where we go to remembering, like acknowledge this time is extra hard and I can't maybe do it right every time. And the first step is the expectations we have for ourselves. Maybe I can't do it all, but what's that one thing that I can start to build in that would feel, like a win in parenting? And when I make those mistakes, what are those steps that I can take to repair? Can I begin by just saying, I'm sorry, I messed up, I'm doing my best? And, I'm often pretty honest. I will say to my son, I am exhausted, right? I am worried about this stupid virus that isn't going away and it's stressing me out. This is not about you. And so if I don't seem as happy or smiley, or I seem like my voice is a little bit different, mommy's having a hard time right now. And I'll be honest at an age appropriate level about what's going on. And that's a step. And when it comes to the self-care and self-compassion, the self-compassion is that forgiveness and that ability to say to yourself, like, I wouldn't ask this of anyone else. What I'm asking of myself is unreasonable. And it's acknowledging your pain. Like, this hurts. This is hard. It's giving yourself the space for that. And then in terms of the self-care, it's figuring out, all right, what are those steps that I need to feel good? For me, it is exercise. I make sure that I exercise every day. And my husband is really great about supporting me with that. And not everyone has that. But for me, it could vary. It could be 20 minutes or it could be 80 minutes. And I just do whatever I can. It might be all at once, or it might be little bursts of just walking around my room between patients. It's anything that I can do to make sure that I get what I need in that day. So you have to pinpoint what that is for you. And when you take care of yourself a little bit more, get a little bit more space in that cup before it fills up again. And I would say, if you're particularly struggling, looking for those outlets. Is it talking to a friend or a spouse? Or, would it benefit to have a therapist to work through all of this with? Where can you get support, safely at this time that you're not getting if you're having trouble getting to a point where you can give yourself the self-care and the self-compassion?
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody who joined today, spending your Friday with us, asking these incredible questions. Really appreciate it. Dr. Jaclyn Halpern, thank you so much for this information. Wonderful takeaways for all of us to implement in any setting. Truly appreciate your knowledge and your time. Everybody, have a great weekend and look forward to seeing you maybe next month for our Lunch and Learn.
Thanks so much, everyone.